Okay, so today I want to expose yet another racist. This guy's name is SheepDogTV, and like the other guy I exposed last time, this guy has another goon that engages in sophistry, um, trying to sound as logical as possible, but actually harboring deep-seated racism himself. All right, so this piece of shit um, was. I'll give you the setup of how this began. So he began like ranting um, about like how much of a good father he is or some bullshit like that, self-praising, giving himself tremendous accolades on his parenting ability, I guess. And then in his like rant, he mentions that he doesn't talk to his kids about politics. And that by itself is not necessarily a bad thing, depending on how young the kids are. Although he did mention that he has a daughter that's 19 or something like that. Um, and of course, this guy's a right winger anyway, so I wouldn't want him talking and brainwashing people about his warped racist view on politics. But I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt, like I do with most people. Um, but in that, he said he doesn't talk to his kids about race. Now, that I did find objectionable. And I simply said, why wouldn't you have a conversation about race with your kids? What's wrong with teaching your kids about equality and fair treatment unless you don't believe those things yourself? So, this video is going to be a little bit different, I think, hopefully, in that I'm not going to interject too much except where I believe it's necessary. And I'll just kind of let the video speak for itself. So, let's just watch.
Conversation about race with your kids. What's wrong with teaching your kids about quality and fair? All right, Thugna, RAP.
Mhm.
Okay,
Mhm.
because I feel like putting attention on the color of people's skin is a way to is a way that kind of creates some sort of bias or racism. Like when with my kids, why is that guy black? Well, that guy's just an American. He's just he's just different color. Okay, my kids don't look at somebody that's brown, black. My kids don't look at other people, and race isn't the first thing that comes.
Okay, looks like I lied. I'm going to be interrupting this quite a bit. So, like already you see the problem. Like he already is like kind of creating this like magical utopia where racism doesn't exist. And like he's doing the whole I don't see race thing. He's gonna deny that he takes that position later, but he absolutely, along with his toady stooge in the background, they do this whole like I don't see race thing. And I simply say during this, you think teaching kids not to discriminate or agree with racist teachings is racist?
To mind. It's with my kids, all they are is just people. Okay,
Shit. Hold on one second.
this is the thing. Uh, you shouldn't have to teach your kids not to discriminate if you're raising your kids right.
Yeah,
If you're
exactly.
raising your kids right, that is never a conversation. It's never a fucking thing. I
Evidently, he's not raising his kids right, as he likes to put it. Um, you're gonna find out later. This guy's a total Trump tard, a complete toady for Trump, along with his stooge in the background. Yeah, I can see why you don't teach your kids that racism is bad because you're a racist yourself.
am a white man married to a Mexican woman with half Mexican fucking kids.
Okay, Mexican is not a race, by the way, you idiot. I didn't bring it up in this conversation because I felt like it would just sidetrack the issue. But these guys are so incredibly ignorant about race. They don't know anything about it. Mexican is not a race. That's a nationality. Just like American is not a race. White people are not by default American. But these races, they have these implicit assumptions and biases. Mexican's not a race. And later on, either him or someone else is going to say something about Latino. Latino's not a race either. Okay, it's a um, cultural identity, is what it is. You can be black and Mexican. You can be white and Mexican. You can be mixed and Mexican. Now, what he is equivocating with Mexican is actually another word called mestizo. You might want to like learn what these big words mean, uh, dude. Sheepdog, who actually like looks kind of like a weird deformed sheep.
It's not a conversation in our household. Their uncle, not blood uncle, the old vocalist of my band, they call
Okay, now keep in mind there's going to be a lot of racists in the chat. I do my best to ignore them in the beginning, at least. But later on, I do dignify these racist pieces of shit, mostly because, well, we'll get to it when we get to it.
him. He calls himself Too Cold. His name is Sean, but he's black dude. He's a black dude, and
Okay, so now this guy is doing the whole I have black friends thing to prove that he's not a racist. Do I need to even explain why that's bad? Having black friends doesn't prove that you aren't a racist. And later on, he's going to talk about how his daughter has a black or had a black boyfriend, trying to prove and desperately prove to everyone that he's not a racist.
he's been in their lives ever since they were little babies. I have a really small circle of friends, and they're very colorful. I got black friends, brown friends, white friends. And in our household, it's not weird for there to be a colored person in my house.
Okay, so here's the thing.
No,
real
no,
quick,
no. Hold on a second. Yeah, you go ahead. Talk to Thugna, because you could do this
Yeah.
way better, Doghouse.
So he's delegating the responsibilities of actually having a discussion on race because he admits that he really has no fucking idea what he's talking about. So now his stooge in the background is gonna start steering the ship.
Hit it.
It's
Hit it.
okay.
I'm going to hit
So
my
what?
vape.
It's okay. Yeah, you hit your vape. Thugno, one of the things I'll say is I think, and quite honestly, you know, you're coming in here with pretty like you're talking about the country you're living in has terrible race problems. So what Sheepdog's trying to say is that you shouldn't even need to have the conversation if you raise your kids right. Discrimination is based off.
Yeah, but the problem, like raising your kids right, but it doesn't matter. Like, first of all, I don't believe for a second this guy raises his kids right, and that's gonna be proven pretty quickly when he's snapping at it at like this little kid that's bothering him. Like, this guy is a kind of a piece of shit when it comes to being a father. Um, However, that's not the point anyway. I'm making a point about there being race problems in the society that you're living in. Therefore, yes, you need to have a good discussion about race and racism with your kids. Because guess what? There's more to this country, there's more to this world than the fucking little piece of shit neighborhood that you're living in.
Of hate. And if your kids are discriminating against somebody, that means that you raised them wrong. Just having a conversation with them about discrimination doesn't mean that your kids aren't going to discriminate. It's raising them up, providing them with a whole set of different respect mechanisms beyond just discrimination. If you raise them up with respect, the idea is that um, will end up not discriminating as a result of their upbringing. So that's kind of what he's saying is that what and even if we were to concede to your point, Doug.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter. That by itself, like even if we were to assume that he's father of the year, which obviously he's not, that is ignoring the point that racism exists in the country that you're living in, you idiot. So therefore, it's not good enough. You have to take an active position against racism because other people are racist. Assuming that your kids aren't racist. I have no idea. I mean, they're kids. I don't know anything about them. But I know that this guy's a racist, so I wouldn't be surprised if at least some of them were.
And that would be what good would it be to just sit down and talk to them about discrimination if you actually raise them up right?
Because they live in a racist country.
Okay, you might want to ban this bot, this spammer 404, 401. Let me try to ban him. Ban.
All right, so let me get in
Ban
on
him.
this. My 19-year-old daughter, her first boyfriend ever was a black kid. Okay, and he was a good fucking kid, right? And her best friend was a gay black kid. And they are always at my house every fucking day when my oldest daughter lived with us. She's grown and she's moved out of the house. But what I'm saying is, my other kids, my 3 younger
I doubt it.
kids, have always been around different types of people. Different types of people. That's right. Sheepdog TV's oldest daughter dated a black kid, and he didn't give a fuck about the color of his fucking skin. Who fucking knew, right?
Yeah, so he's trying to prove that he's not a racist by saying he has black friends. His daughter dated a black guy. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care if your daughter had a 10-man gangbang with black dudes. It's irrelevant to the points I'm making. What a moron. These people are so fucking insecure. They have to constantly make these bad arguments trying to prove to people that they're not racist. You don't need to prove to people that you're not a racist if everything you said betrays that you're a racist.
Conservative, American flag, I'm a racist piece of shit Nazi, right? But every day, my half Latino babies, half Latina and Latino babies, were around my oldest daughter's black boyfriend and her best friend, a black gay guy, which he's like part of the fucking family still, right? He's still part of the family. He still comes and hangs out. My oldest daughter lives in Michigan now with her grandparents. She moved to Michigan. Fucking, if when you raise your kids around like that, right? When there's all different colors and types of people in and out of your home all the fucking time, racism isn't a conversation.
So let's just assume that he lives in this racial utopia that he's talking about. Do you not see that there's bigger problems? Let's just assume. I don't completely believe everything this jackass says. But even if we were to grant him that, that's not the point. Because the society, and when I say society, not that piece of shit neighborhood that this guy is living in, I'm talking about the greater society. This country has enormous race problems. All you have to do is just turn on the news from the past week to see that. How much police violence has there been directed at non-whites? You stupid fucking ignorant piece of shit. It's like, well, as long as I don't have any race problems in my neighborhood or under my roof, then I don't need to give a shit about it. Man, grow the fuck up. What a moron.
Right? It's just not a conversation. They don't see hatred in our home. They see all kinds
Yeah,
of folks
but do they see
with our families
but
and
but
shit.
but do they see hatred being espoused by other people that align with your political affiliation? Do they see that though?
Racism only exists because you won't leave it the fuck alone. You won't.
No, no, hell no. No, that is the dumbest thing you could ever fucking say, you stupid fucking moron. You dumb hick piece of shit. That is not the reason why racism still exists. Derek Chauvin murdering George Floyd by choking him to death with a knee on his neck would still have happened if you ignored racism for the rest of your life. If every single American ignored racism, that would have still happened. And black people would continue to be murdered by the police, even if you ignore all the race problems. If you just leave it the fuck alone, Derek Chauvin wouldn't have murdered George Floyd. What a moron! What kind of sick, demented piece of shit is this? Now, I don't think he actually goes through that thought process, but it shows how stupid he is. The fact that he doesn't. He's saying all these flippant, nonsensical things, these platitudes that are demonstrably wrong. Ignoring race and racism doesn't make racism go away, you stupid idiot. And he contradicts himself later, too. He admits that racism still exists. But now he's saying that racism only exists because you won't stop talking about it. Well, which is it? Is it an imaginary thing that's caused by talking about race? Or does it still exist? What a fucking dumbass hick.
You won't stop talking about it. It's all over the mainstream media. Politicians won't shut the fuck up about it.
There's an argument to be had about that, but the argument of racism exists. Sure, racism will always exist, right?
No,
Racism
no,
will never.
no. That's not true. That's not true. I don't agree with that. But again, it's a different thing. That's a whole different topic. That's why I didn't really want to pursue it. But I did I did kind of mention briefly that I don't agree with that. Like people who always say racism is always going to exist. No, you're not. You're not futurists. Okay, stop talking about the future when you don't even understand the present.
Be gone. Um, the argument one could have is saying, does the racism that exists today is it the same extent to which racism existed in the 60s and 70s? What I've noticed from the most conservatives, this is where the conservatives and the liberals tend to differentiate, is that conservatives tend to believe in the racism from the 60s and 70s, not believe in it, but like that their view on racism is what happened during the 60s and 70s and prior to that. A lot of leftists tend to point to that, but when they talk about racism, it's more in a subjective sense of a more broader definition of racism. So the definition by which a lot of conservatives argue on racism
So this is a lot of babble. Like if your eyes are glazing over during this babble, I don't blame you. But we'll just have to endure it for a little bit.
would argue that it is nowhere near what it used to be in the 60s and 70s, though the left would then tend to argue that it is higher because of a more subjective and
Okay, so I understand that he's ranting and he's babbling. So I just ask, just cut him off. This fucking babbling idiot. I just say, give me an example how racism is subjective, because he's babbling.
broader definition of racism. So the problem is, well, what I'm saying is subjective is like, for example, right, prior to the 60s and 70s, racism typically was pretty explicit, right? It was pretty apparent when you said certain things you're going to be saying to certain people of color. Um, you were saying things like that. You were treating them as inferior, things of that nature, correct? Here, in the more modern sense of the word of racism tends to be more broader, right? It'd be, oh, we have, for example, a lot of correlative things, right? So we tend to say the system is racist, right? You have systemic racism due to, say, higher black people get sentenced at a higher rate than white people. That would then be systemic racism. It's changed over time. It's not to say that racism is lessened or anything like that, but you have to understand with the framework.
Okay, so he's babbling again. So he's trying to say that racism in the past it was explicit. People said the N word more often. Yeah, probably. However, you already see the problem here. Now, first of all, what his explanation of how racism is subjective. This is not subjectivity. He doesn't understand what the word subjective even means. And later he concedes that because it was just a dumb thing to say. Racism is subjective. What he's trying to say is that the meaning of racism has changed, which I don't think I agree with that. Like that doesn't even really make sense. The word racist or racism is actually a relatively new word. Like it's not that old of a word. It's only like decades old. Um, in any case, explicit racism uh, still exists, as I point out here. They just use more euphemisms and coded language. Like Tucker Carlson, for example, uses a lot of euphemistic language, which is signaling to his racist white nationalist audience as to what he's talking about, especially like when he's talking about, blah, 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 third world, blah, 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 immigrants from the third world. He's talking about non-whites, but anyone with a brain understands what he's talking about. And they can manifest in far more explicit ways, like, for example, go back to where you came from, which is uh, something Drumpf uttered and was repeated by his flock, and was manifested quite explicitly. Um, but there are more problems with this, which I will get to in just a little bit.
Of how conservatives and liberals look at these definitions. And you have to understand that it comes to the meeting ground to understand this. Well,
Exactly. Yeah,
okay, that
Nuggy actually made
what
a good point in the chat where he says racist has no meaning anymore, and he's basically back.
No, racism actually has pretty good meaning. It doesn't have a narrow meaning, nor should it have a narrow meaning, but they want it to have a narrow meaning, which I will get into soon.
Backing up what you're saying. Like the word racist gets thrown around so wildly that it doesn't
No, it
fucking.
doesn't.
It's like racism used to be like a really sharp knife, where when you fucking
Remember back in the old days when racism actually meant racism? Remember how it means what I believe it to mean and it should only mean what I want it to mean?
stuck somebody with it, it hurt. Now when somebody calls you a racist, it like me, it don't even bother me anymore. It doesn't even fucking
It don't even bother me no more. Fucking N-words.
bother me. Like just because I'm a
The-
conservative, I get this blanket statement that I'm a fucking racist. Well, I think what fucking Doghouse is trying to say right here is this: if we compare today to like 40
That's his name, Doghouse. I didn't even know what the fuck his name was. He was just some like idiot in the background, like trying to sound smart, trying to sound logical. I didn't know his fucking name is Doghouse. Like, can you imagine calling yourself Doghouse? What does he think? He's like badass. I'm from the doghouse. I'm from the streets.
50 fucking years ago, um, our society in this country is evolving and it's less racist this year than it was last year, than it was the year before, than it was the year before that, and we're ever getting better. I'm not saying
Okay, so you see the trick that him and the his stooge doggy boy in the background. You see the trick they're doing. So they narrowly define racism. So they never actually define racism, but they're implying it means something very very narrow. And when you define it or you implicitly define it as something narrow, then yeah, of course you can say becomes less and less and less because there are some things pertaining to racism that have gotten better. Of course they have. But that's also problematic because you're using an outdated or very specific, narrow definition of racism so that you can proclaim that it's less. But when you, but then that immunizes yourself from criticism about how racism can manifest in different ways, and that permits you to ignore the manifestations of racism that persist to this day.
that racism doesn't exist. What I'm saying is that most people are decent people. On a majority, most people are not fucking racist. Now, there's a
Whoa,
difference
whoa,
in
whoa!
my
I
eyes
think I think
between
I fucking missed that. He said majority of people are not fucking racist. Well, evidently not, because passive racism is a major problem. How many people look at these police violence videos and agree with the cops? Yeah, that's a form of racism, you idiot. Now, the problem with these dumb hicks is that they think that racism means you have to say the N word. You have to either say something racist. You know, it's what I was talking about before in my other video. Um, you have to say the N word in order to be a racist, or you have to actually commit an act of violence against black people um, in order to be racist. Like something like that, something obvious. But they ignore and they dismiss what's called passive racism and how it can manifest in subversive ways and perhaps in ways that they aren't consciously aware of.
a racial bias and actual what? What about it? All right, I'll be right back.
Yeah,
All right,
please
so
go.
I'll
Keep
take
talking.
over.
Keep talking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is the most.
So Thugna,
This guy,
I want to say,
this guy, this guy is better off not being here at all. Not that his stooge doghouse man is any better.
I want to apologize for using the word subjective. It seems like you're getting really hung up on the word subjective. I don't think it's really relative in terms of this.
Relative in terms of this, you're the one who used it, dude. Like when you use the wrong word, geez, getting hung up on this. Stop blaming other people for your fuck ups, you idiot. All right, it's not my fault that you don't know how to speak English.
I think I may have misspoke. Okay, I think you're getting really hung up on the word subjective.
Yeah, learn how to speak. Learn what words actually mean. Then
Um, what was there? There's someone in chat that asked, or you said you're essentially saying racism worse in the past, and I agree with that to some degree. However, in other respects, it's worse. Well, okay, so I wanted to mention this too. The mere existence of the word dog whistle in today's society is something to even further explain and prove my point that dog whistle may have existed in the past. I'm not aware of any instances of where this is in any kind of history text or anything. If someone could show me, that'd be great. But most of the time, racism in the 60s and 70s was more explicit, right? Um, in the 60s and 70s, it was very, very explicit. It was very, you knew right away whether or not someone was racist by whether the language they used. You're denying the existence of racist dog was no. What I am saying here, Thugna, that you seem to not be listening to right now, is that the
look
definitions
how triggered he
have
gets. Look how triggered he gets over just a simple clarification of what his point is. Because he rambles, he babbles so much. Seeing it a second time, I understand the point that he's trying to make. I think he's trying to say um, the fact that racist dog whistles exist today proves that in the past racism was more explicit. Again, what I said before is still true though, is that racism is still explicit today. But yes, yeah, there are dog whistles. They need to use that because society has become less tolerant of racists.
Changed, right? What I am saying is conservatives operate over the old definition, right? Which is a specific, explicit um, superiority complex, right? It's based off of that definition, that old definition. The newer definition, which is what liberals tend to operate off of, is a lot more broader.
So this I point out. So I say, do you know what a genetic fallacy is? So I'm going to explain this a little bit more in detail later. So why don't we just get to it when I actually bring it up?
I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about, Thugna. I'm not too sure. I'm not an expert on race relations. I'm trying to explain really.
Expert on race relations. A genetic fallacy has nothing to do with racial relations. Genetic fallacy has nothing to do with genetics. It's probably not a very good label for the word, but I'll explain what genetic fallacy means in just a second.
What I'm trying to explain is kind of what I'm trying to help bridge that gap because I feel like a lot of liberals and conservatives talk past each other on this, right? When we look and talked about conservatives, again, I'll say it for the 15th time, they
15th
operate,
time.
and when they talk
What
about
an idiot.
racism, they talk about it in the 60s and 70s sense.
Okay, yeah, this is a genetic
Liberals
fallacy.
tend to talk about it in the more 2020 modern sense, which is that
Damn these
it's a lot more
libs that
broader.
keep
There's
on
a lot more things
using
that fit under the
newfangled
umbrella of
words.
racism. Does this mean that racism has been watered down?
All right, so here I finally explain it. So a genetic fallacy has nothing to do with race. Yeah, this guy is a complete moron. And in fact, a genetic fallacy has nothing to do with genetics. I'll admit the name of the fallacy is not that great, but I'm not the one who invented the name. A genetic fallacy has nothing to do with the meaning of. A genetic fallacy has to do with the meaning of words. Whether race had a different definition in the past or not has nothing to do with the meaning of the word now. Why are you using an outdated definition? So this is something that happens all the fucking time. So with a genetic, so he's invoking a genetic fallacy. He's saying that racism had a different meaning than what it means today. And you guys, and he doesn't say it outright, but he implies that like we're using the wrong definition or he's using the correct definition. That is not correct. Words can change meaning over time. Now, I don't even know if what he's assuming to be correct is actually correct. Racism, like I said, is not an old word, um, and he's trying to equivocate the meaning of racism with the belief that some races are superior to others. That is not the totality of racism. Nor do I necessarily think that was the original definition of racism per se. In any case, it doesn't even matter because words can change meaning and they can have the original meaning does not have any relevance today. I can give you an example. For example, the word decimate. Today, the word decimate means to completely destroy the enemy, right? We decimated the enemy. It's just analogous to that. The original meaning of the word decimate meant it was a form of punishment employed by the Roman Empire for disciplining their soldiers. They would kill every 10th man or some bullshit like that. I don't know. I don't know the details. But it was a form of punishment. It meant something very different, is the point. There's other words. There's plenty of other words that have changed meaning that no longer mean the same thing as they originally did. Like arrive used to mean a ship arriving from sea, right? It doesn't mean that anymore. So words can change meaning, and this guy is using an outdated definition of racism, even if we were to assume that what he's babbling about is correct. That is what a genetic fallacy is, and I'm trying to point this out to him, and I do not think I actually got through to him at all.
It's a very possible explanation. I don't know, because we've talked about implicit bias. We talk about dog whistling. We can talk about things like correlative studies, which show, like I said, black people being sentenced at a much higher rate. These are some things that I would argue could show that these have been watered down. Genetic fallacy has nothing to do with race. Genetic fallacy has to do with the meaning of words, whether races are different definition in the past or not. Doesn't have to do with the meaning of the word now. Why are you using an outdated definition? Well, because here's the thing,
Because
Doug. No, and I feel like at this point. I feel like maybe either I don't know if you're trying to have a genuine conversation.
so he's getting really triggered now because anytime he's actually refuted, because he thinks he's smart, but he's not. Doghouse Boy seems to have the intelligence of a dog. Um, he then assumes bad faith, even though he's talking about correlative studies. So he's going to talk about systemic racism later, and holy shit, what a piece of fucking shit.
Or not. But again, as I just said, why are you using an outdated definition? One is I'm not even like I don't really like talking about the racism thing, but we're talking about it now, so let's talk about it, I guess.
Oh, you don't like
What
talking
I
about racism? Oh, how convenient for you. How privileged of you. We're going to get into that a little bit later.
am merely trying to explain is that you are expanding the word of what racism means. To conservatives, I'd say that in really the 60s and 70s sense, I think that and it's fine. No, Doug, no, I don't know. Like, I feel like every time I mention something, you try to rebut it and not really.
Yeah, exactly. Every time you say something that's wrong, I'm going to rebut it, you idiot. He's saying, I don't like talking about racism. Yeah, and then I rebut that. I think talking about racism is pretty important. Just own up to the stupid shit that you say and stop whining and complaining when I disprove you on all the dumb shit that you say.
Really agree on anything I'm talking about. Whereas if I've come to the table and said, look, I agree with you on some instances, I don't think that racism has ever gone away, right? Even by the old definition
Well, according to Hick Boy, who's just sitting here like a fat potato, racism only exists because we keep talking about it. So, nice contradiction.
or the new definition, right? Racism will never go away. And especially if we continue to expand the definition of racism, racism will certainly not go away.
Yeah, because racism manifests in different ways. Of course, if you narrowly define racism to mean whatever you want it to mean, you can then proclaim that it's being mitigated. But then that ignores the more pernicious ways and the more subversive ways in which racism can manifest. But even with that said, it still manifests in explicit ways like police violence against non-whites. Oh, what a moron.
Right? If we continue to expand and unroll this definition of racism, will never go away, right? But if we hold consistent
That's
to the
not
old
true.
definition, right, which was 60s and 70s racism, being basically one race believing they are superior over another, right? And it's a very general term of what they believed in the 60s and 70s. Then we would be able to eliminate that, right? We could get down to a basically net zeros or a gross zero, whatever you want to call it. When we continue to expand the definition and we put a lot more people under this umbrella of racism, then it only expands racism. It doesn't lower it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So he's trying to redefine racism. He's trying to redefine racism so he can artificially mitigate the incidence of racism. Wow. That is wordplay. That is wordplay. Oh man, what a dishonest bozo. He even admits to his deceit. What a fucking scumbag. So now
So
these
that's
fat
something I want people
potatoes
to
just kind of
understand
sit,
is
don't know
that
what to say.
it's not to say one is right or the other. You want to expand the definition, that is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. School of Humanitarian Science, racism is a system advantage based on race. It is a hierarchy. It's a pandemic. Racism so deeply embedded within U.S. minds and in society that it's virtually impossible to escape. Here's one with your position. If you define racism narrowly, then you can proclaim that racism is mitigated when not all the race problems in this country have been addressed. So, okay. And here's the thing, Thugno, right? I'm willing to sit here and say that you can address both of these in the same thing. They can exist. You can still say that racism has gone down and acknowledge that there have been race problems due to racism from the 60s and 70s. These things can exist mutually, they don't have to exist exclusively. You can say that due to the effects of the 60s and 70s, in which a lot of leftists do this, by the way, is they point to the 60s and 70s and say, do you not understand how redlining and how
So he's trying to like fixate on the 60s and 70s as the source of all the race problems. No, it goes back far further than that, and racism manifests in different ways to this day that have nothing to do with the 60s or 70s per se. Like it's a weird argument. I don't even know where he's going with this.
all these other different positions that put African Americans in these particular positions, they point to the 60s and 70s all the time, right? So we can still acknowledge this.
Oh man,
Well,
this is like
yeah.
an overly fucking complicated fucking
Yeah, it's a little bit over the head of Mr. Potato Head here. I can sympathize with them. Actually, I don't. He's just a fucking idiot.
Conversation, and
Well, racism is a very complicated
it's the
conversation to
reason why
have.
I don't fucking usually talk about it. I
Yeah,
usually don't
because
talk
I'm
about
too
it on my
stupid to
stream because it's
understand it.
like you have this, and I want to say this to you, Doghouse. People like
Doghouse.
me and
I
you.
can't
You
get
were
over
born
that.
in Texas, right?
Yeah.
All right, so me and you were born. We're native Texans. We're a whole
Hmm.
Born and raised in Texas. Yeah, big surprise. They're a bunch of racists, huh? Yeah. No. Well, thank you. Thank you for clearing that up for us.
different breed of an animal, man. We're built different. Down here in fucking Texas, like, uh, it
Down here in Texas, we don't give
it's
a
crazy.
fuck about
Down here
race,
in
and look
Texas,
how
first
great
of
the
all, we're
race
not
relations
soft as
here are.
baby shit, right? You can have a
We
white
have
guy
great
and a
race
black top guy
relationships
that are
in
great
Texas.
friends, saying shit to each other,
We call each other
that would
N-word
get
all
you
the
fucking
time.
instantly fucking canceled on any fucking
Can
platform.
you believe
Like,
that
we're
they
way
cancel us for
different
saying
down
the
here.
N-word?
Way fucking different in Texas than the rest of the
They
fucking
cancel me for
United
being a
States.
fat
Like,
ass.
oh, and the people in the rest of the United States probably think Texas is the most racist fucking place, but down here, I
No.
tell you right now,
Say it ain't
I tell you
so.
right now, like the N-word, I don't hear anybody fucking saying that shit down here in Texas
They
at
don't
all,
say it unless we say it
at all.
privately.
Well, it depends on where you're from. But I've
Did you
like
see that?
talked
Did you
to
hear that little
dog
quip
boys.
by Dog Boy? Depends on where you're from. Depends on where you're from. He was trying to say that as quickly as possible. Depends on where you're from. Depends on where you're from. Depends on where you're from. The words per second on that line were amazing. You should get a Guinness World Record for saying depends on where you're from. Now let me continue to to deny the existence of racism. Blah, 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 blah. Oh, racism is blah 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 blah. Blah.
Not
Okay.
gonna. I'd rather not get into that
Well,
conversation because it gets very
what I'm saying is like the
Well,
reason
what
why you
I'm
can't
saying is
relate
people don't
to
say the N word. Come on, wait a minute. Don't contradict me here. I don't even know what contradict means. But look, I mean, come on, come on, dude. We're trying to we're trying to make up that Texas ain't as racist as that actually is. You're making me look bad here. Come on.
Thugna is because we're from Texas.
well, quite honestly,
Maybe where Thugna is, racism is a huge fucking problem. Here in Texas,
Actually, no, it's not. Geez, do you not watch the news? Like in Texas, do they not have televisions? Did they not have internet? What are you doing on Twitch? Jeez, it's like you're so blinded to what's going on in this fucking country. He's one of those idiots that's like, I don't know what's going on in the world and I don't care and I'm proud of it. Man, you stupid fucking ignorant fat piece of shit.
I don't fucking see it. I don't see the
I don't think
issues.
I don't think Thugna is a troll. But I will note that Thugna seems to be kind of every time that we mention something, again, there seems to be little agreement that Thugna is coming from, which
Yeah,
in
it's hard
today's
to
world,
agree with a bunch
sometimes
of
I tend to
racists.
agree with Thugna to some degree. So I don't know what your conclusion is here, Thugna. It seems that you keeping you're kind of falling in the definition. Again, I think that if we're going to have a conversation, you have to understand where one side's coming from in order to have this conversation. You seem to refuse to understand where the one side's coming from on this,
Correct. I
right? And
refuse
to
to
go back to
understand
what
where a racist is
way
coming
back to
from.
what Sheepdog was trying to say, when you came in here and asked about do you teach your kids about racism, um, again, I don't think that's your place to tell somebody how to raise their kids. First and foremost.
Wait,
Secondly,
what?
I think that
What? I didn't tell anyone how to raise their kids. I seem to recall asking a question because I wanted to understand his views on racism. Now, with that said, yeah, I think it is a good idea to teach your kids about race and racism because evidently, um, the race problems in America are due in large part to ignorance because people don't talk about race and racism. That's what I believe. So, yeah, I can tell you how to raise your kids because there's this thing called the First Amendment, which you hide behind constantly to spout your racist vitriol, by the way. You and your ilk, that is.
raising your kids right, there shouldn't be a need to have this conversation if you raise them right. You shouldn't have to have this conversation with them.
And also, like, if it ever needed to be brought up, like, all my kids are pretty young except for my oldest daughter. And well, we know my oldest daughter doesn't have a race issue because her first boyfriend was a black kid.
Ugh, shut the fuck
Okay,
up about your daughter,
uh,
man.
but like with my younger kids, if there ever came a time where they said
Come on, you know my daughter ain't racist. She took some black cock up her butthole. I mean, come on. That young man, he was shooting up his load right in her pussy. Come on now.
something or asked me a question where I thought the conversation needed to be had about the color of somebody's fucking skin. If I had to have that conversation, and it may come up, I'm not saying it won't. I'm just saying so
You know, I'm sure he would bitch and complain about how vulgar that joke was. Meanwhile, like later on, he's gonna like start bitching about like race and jokes. He's gonna be bitching about race and jokes. But I'm almost positive he would cry and scream about how I'm making jokes, making vulgar jokes about his daughter because you know racists are snowflakes and they also have double standards.
far as a parent of 4 children, I haven't had to have this conversation with them because they don't.
Yeah.
My kids aren't.
Well,
Yes,
seeing as
I'm
how
not
you're
gonna
a
say that
racist,
my
maybe you
kids don't see
shouldn't.
color because that's just the stupidest statement ever. Yes, my kids can see that this kid is brown and that the color
I don't see race except when I do.
of their skin is different, but they don't make that like that shit doesn't matter to my kids. It's not they didn't my kids didn't grow up in the 60s. My kids don't know what the Ku Klux Klan is. My kids don't know that I'm not having conversations about my with my kids
Oh,
that
he's
there's
babbling
fucking
and he's
neo-Nazi
boring.
white supremacist groups. Like my 12 years old, 10 years old, and 5 years old. I'm just going to let my kids be kids. Let them have fun, let them play
Let kids
Roblox,
be
eat
kids.
dirt, play in the fucking mud. And if I ever
Play in the
need to
mud and
have the
become like
conversation with
black
them,
people.
like they ask me something that's racially motivated, well then I'll deal with it. But until that fucking happens, I think that I'm raising my kids pretty good, and they don't give a shit what color of somebody's skin is, and they don't give a shit what somebody's sexual preference is because they've been exposed to folks that have
Great, but do they give a shit when police commit violence against non-whites? Do they give a shit about that? Do they see how that's racist? Did they see that video of that drill sergeant harassing that young black man just because he was black? Did they see that as racist? That's what I care about, you idiot. Do you not see the bigger picture here beyond just the individual interactions that your kids or you have with people? Man, geez, get a life. You're here on YouTube talking about politics. See the bigger picture.
have different color skin than
Yeah,
they do, and they've also been exposed to a person that had different color skin to them and was a flaming homosexual.
I'm curious. What I know we keep poking at Thugna, but it's the only contention that we seem to have in the chat, so it kind of provides a little bit of content. Let's be fair here. But Thugna said police violence against people, especially non-whites, is a major problem.
I'm too boring to think of anything interesting to say, so we gotta rely on Thugna.
Well, even though we're kind of pivoting here, a little bit,
Pivoting.
but
No, actually, no,
the
no, no, we're not actually pivoting here, you idiot. We're talking about racism. What a moron. Police violence against non-whites is a huge racial issue here. You don't see how that's related? Pivoting. Man, what a moron.
the major problem. I wonder how you quantify that. Because the way I quantify a problem is based on a statistical analysis in which I would say that there's about 2,000 people a year that tend to die at the hands of police. But when you extrapolate that into how many interactions happen per year, you realize it's a 0.00003% chance that you will end up dying at the hands of police. Now, granted, what I will then hear from the rebuttal from Thugna, I'm sure of, will be, oh, well, uh, people of color tend to die more disproportionately compared.
Okay, so he's babbling a lot, using a lot of technobabble, a lot of numbers, a lot of verbiage. Um, so this is a typical tactic done by racists like him, especially subversive racists. So they try to minimize the abhorrence and the perniciousness of police violence by citing some improbability. Um, I can rephrase that probability as I don't even know if the number he's citing is even correct. I don't care. However, I do know that you're actually more likely to be killed by the police than you are to be struck by lightning. So that is true. And systemic violence and systemic racism in policing is actually a major problem, irrespective of the probability of being killed by the police. But yes, you are actually more probable to be killed by the police than you are to be struck by lightning. That's another way of looking at it. So you can frame probability however you want. You can frame it to minimize the incidence of it, or you could phrase it to maximize the incidence of it. No matter what, but it's irrelevant because it is a problem, right? Is he denying that's a problem? He would probably say no, I'm not denying it's a problem. But yet all of his arguments are framed to minimize it. So he's implying that it isn't a problem. You see how subversive and deceitful these people are, these racists are? Is that they refuse to take a position, but they imply everything subversively. They are the most deceitful scumbags on the planet.
compared to white people.
So
As
So I ignore all of his babbling because it's worthless. And I just ask him a straight question. Are you saying there isn't systemic racism in policing? You want to bet that he doesn't give a straight answer? Spoiler alert, he doesn't.
that's what I expect to hear from him soon. Systemic racism in policing.
Yeah, he tried to predict what I would say in response. No, I wasn't going to play his game. I know these idiots. I'm not going to do that tap dance because it's a Red Queen's race. Go look up what that means.
Do you have any causative analysis or causative
Causative
studies instead of
analysis?
correlative studies?
Do you have any causative analysis? So I call him out on that. So correlation is all we have. Especially when it comes to a societal problem, you can't ever prove cause in this. You can't prove cause. The only thing you can ever demonstrate is a correlation in any kind of societal problem, and then you have to infer the cause. But of course, he establishes a false precedent where it is somehow possible to establish cause from a correlation of a societal problem.
Because a lot of the studies I have seen tend to be correlative and not causative.
Yeah, because it's impossible.
Like you were trying
It's
to say that,
impossible to it's impossible to establish cause from data, you fucking idiot. You can't establish cause from just numbers alone when it comes to a societal problem. What an imbecile.
mere presence of there being a disproportionate effect. I don't know if that is saying that the system is racist other than we have a disproportionate effect.
So I don't play his tap
Want
dance.
to
I
know
just say to him,
simply,
I don't want to
I
prove it
don't
to you. I
know
want to
this
know
will
if you
go off of
believe it.
statistical analysis. I want you to show me a causative effect, not a correlative effect.
Yeah, you
Too many times I've
can't
seen
you
people bring
can't
out,
prove cause from statistical analysis, you imbecile. What a moron. You have to make an educated guess after that point. You have to infer it. But he's using that. He's using that impossibility to then proclaim that there is no cause. Now, of course, he doesn't say that. He implies it, though, because that's what all of these deceitful racists do.
studies that only show correlative studies. They
Yeah,
say,
because
well,
they only
did you know
can!
that there are X amount of people that are in prison? Oh, hey, did you know that X amount of people get sentenced? Oh, hey, did you know that this particular X color? But yet none of them can point to
Yeah, so
actual
I say I have
statistical
no
evidence
interest in
for
proving
certain
to you
studies.
anything. I
I
care
care
about
about
what
what
you
you believe.
believe.
What do I believe?
Yeah,
Currently,
what do you believe?
I'll
Currently?
put it in this word so that nobody takes me out of context. I
Yeah.
don't know if this is what you're trying to draw
He's
out of me,
trying to
but
frame
I
his
think you know where I'm
position.
going with this.
He's trying to frame his position so that he can't be criticized. That's what he's trying to do, but of course it doesn't work.
I have seen nothing yet to show
Of course, because you're a
specifically
racist. Here's the thing, there is no law that forces you to accept logic and reason, by the way, right? So, like, if I were to prove that 1 + 1 = 2, you don't have to accept that. There's no law that compels you to accept 1 + 1 = 2, other than reality, of course. So you can always deny racism. You can have reams and reams of evidence that someone's a racist, and then continue to deny it until the cows come home. So it's pointless to prove to these racists that racism exists because there's nothing to compel them to be logical or reasonable because they're not.
specifically, okay, a causative study to show that there is systemic racism. Now,
That's impossible. You can't have a causative study.
Right? This is why, again, the mere fact that you're able to bring these correlative studies up, that there is some kind of disproportionate effect on particular people of color. But we do not know the causative factor.
No, you no
So
no 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 you stupid fucking idiot, no. You are assuming there is no causative factor. You can infer cause by using reasonableness. You can make an educated guess. If the data shows that black people are disproportionately targeted by police, they're disproportionately killed by police, that police disproportionately escalate to violence with black people, you can infer that there is systemic racism, that racism is a problem. You can infer that. What an imbecile. It's impossible to prove it, though. Proof is not a word that's commonly used in social studies. Okay, it's a word that's exclusively used in mathematics in the strictest sense, in the sense that he's trying to use it in, because you can prove to near absolute certainty things in mathematics because the system is defined. But in social issues like this, the system is not defined. It's kind of like how science, you don't prove things in science. You can demonstrate things with evidence, but you can't ever prove it, because the system is inherently unknown. It's unknown to us. And because of that, you can't prove things. It's the same thing with social issues. All you can do is establish a correlation, and then you can make reasonable, intelligent inferences. But he's using the fact that we have to rely on inferences to then proclaim that we can't know, which is patently absurd. That is an argument from ignorance fallacy. Holy shit. He is using ignorance to give undue weight to the proposition that there isn't systemic racism. And while he may not say that explicitly, he absolutely is inferring it.
I'll leave it at that. I think that's the better
Yeah,
way of
please
explaining
leave it
this,
at that,
and I
you
hope that
stupid fucking
you
idiot.
understand how I come at this from.
How
I come
I'm
at this
coming at
very
this with
critically.
sophistry.
How would you determine the cause? Well, there's many
So I
different
call
ways,
Alan that.
right?
How would you determine the cause?
In order, even though again we seem to be kind of going against the frame here.
Not going against the grain here. I'm calling you out on your claim that there aren't causative studies. So I'm just asking him a simple question. How do you determine the cause then? I would let now. Do you think he's going to give an intelligent answer? I got a spoiler alert for you. No, he doesn't.
And we're having a little bit of fun with Thugna now at this point. How would you determine the cause?
We're having a little bit of fun because I'm being called out on stupid shit that I'm saying.
Well, I'm one, not a scientist, but two, the way I would say this is
Yeah,
that
I
you can
agree.
look
You're
at
not a
things
scientist.
like, for example, maybe looking at police scene and seeing what their background is, seeing maybe if there is
Looking at policing.
all these different
Looking at policing and seeing what their background is. What the fuck does that even mean? Looking at policing, that is how he's going to determine the cause. By looking at policing and determining what background there is. If you don't understand what the fuck that means, that's because it doesn't actually mean anything. All right, I'm bored. I'm done. They do kind of babble and rant, especially Mr. Fatass here has been oddly quiet. There's a little bit more to this, but I've spent a little bit, way too much, a little bit and way too much time on these two morons here, and yeah, I think I sufficiently trounced them. So that's it for today. So Sheepdog TV, you and Doggy Boy, Doghouse Man, man who lives in Doghouse, you guys are racist. And more. Expect more videos where I expose the racists on Twitch and YouTube in the future, because that's what I do here. Have a good day, guys.